The next part of our event is going to be a fireside chat, whatever panel discussion, and there's going to be Ash and Alex. Basically, the challenges that we're facing when it comes to social impact. Like I briefly mentioned to you guys that when I threw myself into this nonprofit social impact space, I was kind of delusional, right? I just believed that it should be easy, and whatever you do, people will support you. That is, not universally true because we operate in a complex, kind of like complex environment where there are too many things that affect the way we interact. Chris was perfectly describing all of these components that affect us, the culture, the products, the founders itself. And when it comes to building things for social good, it's actually really, really hard. So this panel is about bringing awareness to those challenges so you don't do mistakes that I've done, and hopefully you do things better than the founders that came before. So with that, I'll kick off. Ash and Alex, I would love for you to give like a quick intro about your experience, what you're doing, just so we have the intro.
Absolutely. I'm really excited to be here. So for the past 10 years or so, I've been supporting founders. I was an entrepreneur. I founded a healthcare startup, backed by NASA, and also founded a nonprofit, Ethical AI Governance Group. And really our mission is to open source frameworks for responsible AI. We have a community of 2,000 executives, founders, and investors. And really the goal is enabling every founder or technologist to embed responsible AI in their product development and really their core ethos. And I've also been supporting the entrepreneurial ecosystem for the past 10 years or so, but pass it over to Alex to introduce himself.
Thanks, Ash. So my name is Alex Fang. Started out my career in finance and wealth management. I read a book, started a nonprofit that ended up becoming the largest volunteer engagement organization in San Francisco before COVID. It was called Serve for Life. Ended up building 62 brick and mortar projects in 12 different countries, helping 500,000 kids get access to clean water, shelter, food, and education, but really just getting to travel to some of the most far off and exciting places in the world and see what the rest of the world looked like and lived like. Founded a CPG company, was lucky enough to exit it to a public, and then got back into impact, worked at Philanthropy University, One Valley, where I met Ash. And now I'm working on some deep tech problems, trying to help de-risk deep tech so that people can invest earlier than they are right now to solve for the valley of death, the commercialization valley of death, some of you may know. And really excited to be here. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. So one of the core components of making social impact is actually having reach, right? The distribution. Because if you're doing something and no one knows about it, basically nothing happens. And not everyone is fortunate to have that reach, right? And that's where the resources, the network come in. And I wanted to briefly touch on that to hear your perspective, like how one individual in the middle of nowhere can still, do amazing things.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, when I was starting a nonprofit, it started with a mission statement and really looking downstream. Who are the governments, who are the universities, who are the corporations that could actually benefit from our mission statement of, in this case, open sourcing frameworks for responsible AI? And thinking, how are we going to actually reach these stakeholders across this value chain? There's tools you can use for this. I mean, there's a platform, Instrumental. There's another platform, Open Grants, that you can use to actually conduct a grant sweep and identify all these opportunities that help your nonprofit. But ultimately, I think it starts there with your mission statement, defining who are these stakeholders across the value chain that could benefit your impact company or your 501c3, and then working backwards from there. Any thoughts, Alex?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think perhaps even more fundamental is you might want to ask yourself, should this be a business? I think there's too many founders, too many companies, and I think a key question you should ask yourself is this a business? Are there any market-driven solutions that I can use to propel this business? If there aren't any market-driven solutions, am I ready to spend a big part of my life doing something that I care about for little or no money? And will I still care about it and feel the same way in 10 years. I can tell you after 7 years of, traipsing around the developing world and getting covered with mosquitoes, it was great. There was one time when I got bit by something and all my skin fell off my body. That like what you think is cool today may not be so fun and exciting in 7 to 10 years. So really think about it. I guess, is this path that I'm going down and investing all this time, effort, and energy into making me a better person? And if it is, then you should probably do it.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, very, very beautifully said, and totally resonates with my personal journey towards social impact. And I think what you guys briefly touched upon is the commercialization factor of social impact. I come from a society actually where I thought the nonprofits are just like nonprofits. There is no money, there is no revenue, there's no monetary component. That's just how it was when I was growing up in Ukraine. And when I came here and started diving into nonprofit world, to me that was a shock. Like, wait a second, there's so many nonprofits here. They're like hospitals, they're universities, they generate billions of dollars. Like, is this a scam? Like, what is this? Yeah, and for me, I literally it took me like almost 2 months to really understand how it all works. And then I got it, that in this environment, we talk about capitalism, about value creation. It's almost like an organic way that we as a society figured out how to do social impact and actually make it sustainable. Because a lot of founders, like me, are very delusional. They jump in and they're like, we're just gonna do everything. There's not gonna be like revenue. We're not gonna sell anything. It's gonna be utopia. Unfortunately, that's not how it works. There are projects that are successful, despite all the, implications of, that vision. But for most, that's not sustainable. A lot of people burn out. A lot of people spend months, sometimes years, trying to make it work. And it still doesn't work. So what you just said about commercialization, I think that's a very important topic that touches upon the actual funding. Because at some point, you as a founder, you make a decision. Is this a thing that a VC would fund? Like, does this align with the objective function of VCs? Am I chasing the 100x returns? Am I, chasing the growth beyond everything? Or am I doing something different? Is it a lifestyle business that could be run by a couple of people and there's no need for growth and it still makes the social good in the world? So that's kind of like the next topic that I would like to touch upon.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating what you're saying about these different categories, right? You might be a technology-driven company where maybe getting funding from a foundation might be the most relevant, and you might not even be a 501c3. You might be 501c3 where you're going to directly apply for a traditional grant. You might be, a technology-driven company. You're neither of those, and you might seek more patient capital or impact capital. So I think that's really important, and this goes back to what I was saying earlier. Really, when you're forming your nonprofit or your impact, social enterprise, whichever, having that understanding which stakeholder that you need to really reach. I think the board you pull together really impacts that as well. Because if you bring, a senior executive from a corporation that has a nonprofit arm, he might be able to actually guide you through how those companies think about ESG or how these companies think about impact. What are the metrics you need to actually communicate and speak their language to actually seek their funding? But if you're going into patient capital or foundations, you might want someone from that background on your board, right? So I think that plays a pretty impactful role.
Yeah, I would certainly agree. There's a gentleman named Kevin Starr who runs a foundation in the Bay Area called the Mulago Foundation. It's a good-sized foundation, 400 million in assets, and he explains it as a doer-payer model. So what are you doing and who's paying for it? And there's really only three people who will pay for it. There's governments, there's high net worth individuals, and then there's philanthropy, which includes private foundations and public charities. So, certainly, yeah, you want to start and figure out what you're doing and who you think will pay for it. And then you have to do your market research. You have to work out your personas and talk to 100 people and see how you were wrong and then readjust, your doer payer model. But, if you can't articulate who your doer and who your payer is, you're really far off from where you need to be.
Awesome, thank you. And to bridge the topic of funding and the objective functions of stakeholders, you guys love the word stakeholders, but it's basically people that receive the value and give you that value back in the form of money. For me, it's been a challenge to actually align these things with the aspect of responsible AI, responsible technology, because when you have conflicting objectives, you have to be really picky about which way you're going and where you're taking money from, whether it's government or foundations or VCs. So I would love to talk about that challenge, how the money affects the responsible AI technology and that aspect.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I mean, if you're looking at what Alex outlined of charitable foundations, a large foundation might have different reporting metrics. They might want an annual report or even quarterly reports as well. They go really into the weeds of how you're running your organization. If you're going into a family office or patient capital, there might be less stringent reporting requirements. If you're taking a venture capital's funding, there are going to be very stringent board meetings. They are going to be returns driven, balance sheet driven. So I think finding out which angle you want to go, that's really important here.
Yeah, I mean, so I have a question for you, Arthur. I know that I wasn't supposed to ask you a question, but
no, you should.
I mean, this is AI for good, right? So like, we start with the end in mind. What's good? Like, what is good to you?
Right. It's a very interesting topic because the good, I think universally, we strive for something that improves our lives, right? The way Chris was talking about it, something that fundamentally pushes us into a better version of ourselves as a humanity. Right now, we've got this kind of like a cultish dichotomy between the doomsayers, right? The AI will come and kills us all, and then the utopian AGI that comes and saves us all, right? But there's a lack of conversation in between of the consequences and implications. And that's where I think the conversation about the good comes in, because that's a very practical way. Does it improve our life, or does it, suck out all of the resources and keep pushing, building, towards the who knows what for what, right?
Yeah, I'm glad that you've put some thought into that, because it does sound like you've thought about what is good.
That's why I don't have sleep.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and the other thing is, I can say for certain that AI is not going to kill us all, guaranteed. I mean, it's going to kill our grandchildren. We're not going to be alive, so it'll be fine. Don't worry. But Ash, what does AI for good mean for you?
Yeah, I think it's about intentional design. So I think it's really in the core of your product development as you're picking your first features, thinking 3-5 years down the line. How is it going to impact our users? How are these decisions, these classifications, these forms of cognition really going to change our user's life? Whether it's positive, whether it's neutral, and whether it's hurting other people in the value chain, the ecosystem. I think that's really important. And even outside of AI for social good, I think every AI founder, every AI product manager should be thinking about these ethical concerns.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and I think to answer your question in terms of the issues around taking funding, I work in climate tech, and we are bankrolled by energy companies, and even the word energy company means oil companies. And that's really hard. So, if you want to develop a technology that you think could save the world, you have to take oil money. I mean, I don't have any kind of lens or assessment of that. I just want to share with you how crappy I feel on a day-to-day basis. I'm just kidding. I mean, I'm just saying like there are natural challenges that exist, right? So if I want to feel like I'm productively engaging and helping to address the climate crisis, there are realities. There are real concessions and things that you think about nonstop, and there are no clear answers. And I think that's a great question, because it is how so many of us operate.
Yeah, and thank you for being open and transparent and sharing your actual way you feel about it, because I feel like a lot of founders struggle with that. Sometimes social impact nonprofit founders stumble upon opportunities where the money comes from a source that would not traditionally be associated with social impact, right? And there's almost stigma around it. And sometimes we have to accept the reality that we can't just, magically change the world. Like tomorrow we wake up and there's no oil and, it's all green energy and there's nothing. Like we have the responsibility to change that future. So I think, that's also a personal choice of everyone, but I totally, see where you're coming from. So we talked about a lot of abstract things, kind of like generalities. I would love for you to share some, success stories, because I'm sure you've seen some, in the kind of like nonprofit founding space. Ash.
Yeah, I know of one founder. She actually created a data platform for public health, and this was working with the government of India, and she was able to provide visibility into at each different city, each different village, what are the different social determinants, these different public health metrics, and she actually learned so much about this problem there that data teams were facing. She founded her own for-profit company, but hearing that story of like delivering a lot of value, social good, taking that lesson and actually creating a startup out of it, I think that was really exciting. Alex here actually started a technology transfer lab with Lawrence Berkeley, and I think you might have met a few interesting deep tech founders as well.
Yeah, I mean, we've met a lot of founders who are using AI to create these digital power plants and effectively balance the grid, which I think is great. I'm more excited about AI's potential within the nonprofit space because I think this is a future win. So how many people here have worked in nonprofits? Okay, so depending on what nonprofit you're in, as long as you have 85% of your money going towards programs, or you can make that case, and 15%, you can have 15% going towards administration. That's really interesting because, nonprofits don't have an incentive to innovate or to cut costs if they're within that range. But AI is so powerful and has the potential to eliminate so much management that I feel as though that template could be a roadmap for almost like this. These are how many humans you have to keep on the books when you look at the 85-15% system that's set up right now. So what that could mean is that if the nonprofit sector uses AI tools, you get less management, more leadership, and more services. And as long as we stay okay keeping that 85-15%, then the 15% could do more really cool stuff instead of just writing grants or doing reporting. And it could serve as a model, just one model for how to address what a lot of people are afraid of, which is massive job loss or everyone pushing to get as much margin as possible and eliminating the human factor. So I'm very excited about how AI could play within the existing inefficiency, or whatever you want to call it, of the nonprofit world. It's fascinating to me. And I'm hopeful it gives us a model or a roadmap for how to deploy AI into other corporate environments.
I want to throw a challenge towards this discussion. So we know how, as let's call it, technology bubble, we lived through a period of time when technology became a universally kind of like affordable, right? All of a sudden you could develop mobile apps, you could spin up websites. You can do that now very easily, and any nonprofit can do that. And I feel like we lived through a phase where all the amazing things were possible on a very low budget, right? You could get volunteers, they could spin up a website or do a mobile app, and you could utilize, as a nonprofit or a social impact startup, you could very quickly get to a certain stage and start providing value in the ecosystem. What I'm seeing right now with the AI wave is the complete cannibalization of the resources by the big tech, where the nonprofits and smaller companies are actually not able to do anything because of the scarcity of the compute and the resources out there, where the cost of building models, even fine-tuning models, becomes unaffordable for these smaller founders that are trying to spin up things. And as you talk about the productivity in the nonprofit space, I constantly think about it. How do we create these tools that help us with the donor management, with the communication, with the fundraising, with all of these like routine, mundane things that happen all the time? That's actually the hardest part about the nonprofit, is not doing good, it's doing the operations. Because there's so much of that you need to do, and all of a sudden AI can actually help with a lot of it. LLMs are capable of helping us with so many processes. We're about to enter this beautiful age of AI agents, where they're all of a sudden are going to do even more work for us. And the question is, who's going to build it? Like, if there's no way for smaller, nonprofit social impact startups to actually get something done. So that's a challenge. That's a deep one, but.
Well, I mean, that's an interesting thought. So it feels like there's not market incentives for a Blackbaud to do this, right? Because they're like one of the largest nonprofit focused companies. But usually when you have this innovation spillover, it's the government that is paying to be the customer that can afford to get something to scale where it becomes cheap enough so that consumers can use it. So that they did that with, the integrated circuit for ICBMs. They did that with, DARPANET. It would be really cool if there was some kind of program where the government would invest in this to bring the cost down, to invest in these models to bring the cost down for civil society. But I don't know. I mean, why isn't everyone in the room volunteering their time to make that happen? Like, it would be
But
cool.
it's not just about time, it's like, if I would ask anyone trying to do like a social impact startup, and we're gonna hear some of these, stories in a bit after this panel, because I want to share more of stories of people that are doing some of the social good as a startup or as a project. And, for all of them, because I talk with them on a daily basis, and they ask for like, hey, how do we get, compute? Because it's so scarce. I've been fortunate to get some, compute from NVIDIA in 2022 when we were doing the evacuations and humanitarian aid in Ukraine. And that has been, a miracle for us, because usually that doesn't happen. And that still doesn't happen, unfortunately. And it's such an edge case scenario where people, it's not just about time. Like, we can assemble all of these people in a room, can get together and start, hacking something together. They're not going to be able to get GPUs. Like, first of all, the scarcity is insane. The cost is insane. And as soon as there's some free GPUs, big tech buys it up. So
I think the big question is, do you actually need to train or fine-tune a model to begin with? Or can you use an existing model and augment that, with your proprietary data? I mean, to give an example of education for, let's say a remote parts of the world where they need access to an LLM for education. Do you really need to train a new GPT or even an SLM, or can you use an existing model and then augment that with information about the local curriculum or local education?
Very good one, because I heard this question before. There are two pathways. First one, you pay OpenAI for inference, and unfortunately, because of the costs here, it's like if you attempt to do that, let's say in Europe somewhere in a small village, you can't pay OpenAI for that. The unit economics will never work, right? So you revert to, okay, let's do our own open model, and obviously those models are not as great, but still there's something. But then you're like, okay, we need to run those models, and they're actually compute heavy even for inference. Where do we get GPUs to run those on? Also a challenge. So
I think one important question is, when will inference costs for some of the smaller models or earlier models get down to the lower cost where that's feasible? And then there's a concept of agent reflection, right? If you use a less mature model, a cheaper model, ask it to reflect on its output, you might be able to get the output you would get from zero-shot GPT-4. So will it get to the point in the next 2 to 3 years? It's too early to say, where inference costs for these less mature models is so low that these companies might be able to offer it for impact companies or nonprofits. It's an open question.
So we should just hope.
Yeah.
No, your idea where you identify this bottleneck in computing and processing power feels like the exact kind of project that some crazy AI billionaire would fund as a philanthropy. And I don't know if anyone's doing that, but why don't you do that? That would be. I feel like people would be like, all right, let's talk. Like, how many GPUs you're gonna buy from us? This is awesome.
Right.
Sweet. But like, that like if that is a bottleneck and it's a true need, I feel like that's something. I feel like if you went to a tech company and said I'm doing AI for good, it's a salon where you get people together and we talk about stuff. They'd be like, oh great, okay, like here's $5,000 for a year. Good luck with that. But if you did something like this, they'd be like, this is great. This is like. I think this could resonate with a lot of companies.
Yeah.
Like just in my experience with dealing with corporate philanthropy.
No, I like it, and that's why I like the panel. You know, on one side we can hope, on the other side we look for billionaires.
I mean, no, I mean, yeah, like if you look at like the way that these people use their donor advised funds, they basically use their donor advised funds to pay for their own services to help, like their kids or something. You know, like.
Right.
So this could be a good use case for them.
I agree.
I think what we need is social impact founders like you that can create the right mechanisms, the right structure, the right data and the framework to actually measure, okay, if we're going to sponsor this out lab, we're going to provide to all these nonprofit companies, how do we actually measure the impact? If you can build that, and someone like you can build that, then I'm sure whether it's the GPU providers, it's big tech, or it's the philanthropists, they'd be more willing to come to the table.
Yeah, I like that idea. Okay, yeah, I think we've landed on some interesting.
Yeah, there's a question in the back.
Yeah, so this is a fascinating point, but the GPU, unavailability of GPUs to do fine tuning or even inferencing has other downstream effects, right? For example, famously, there's somebody at Perplexity who's like tried to recruit somebody, and they were like, "Oh, come back to me when you had like X thousand GPUs," right? So if you don't have that, you're not attracting the talent as well, and maybe those kind of effects. In order to do social good, you need all the power that you can get, and unfortunately, the bottleneck right now is the GPU.
I mean, I feel like technology-based corporate philanthropy loves nothing more than to make a donation for you to buy their stuff. So I mean, like I feel like there's an opportunity here because at the end of the day, they do a lot. Like they do a lot of that.
I think you're actually touching on a good viable pathway. In my experience, when we lived through like a boom of economy, 20 to 23 even, there was a lot of that. Like companies were throwing resources like it's nothing. Now we entered a different state of economy where everyone is like, let's lay off people, cut the costs, let's not give as much resources. And my kind of like feel for the ecosystem, it became really, really hard to get those resources. But I think what Ash mentioned in terms of creating more pathways for companies to almost like make it more meaningful for them to do it, not just like spray and pray and maybe someone will become a business and come back to us, but do it in a more structured way where they can measure the impact and kind of like create a reasoning process behind it. Like we do this, so that happens, in that way. So I really like that. Let's open up for a couple of questions before we switch. Oh, lots of questions. Read the first.
Yeah. So I have two interlinked questions here. First problem I've been dealing with this is capacity building. How do you deal with educating people how to use this technology? It's interlinked with the second problem, people's fear around this, especially I think in more the administrative circles. You're saying in nonprofits, there's a lot of opportunity to automate administrative work and to make money go further. And I think a lot of the admin class of people that are in charge of making the decisions about whether or not to engage with this technology are perhaps understandably very fearful and afraid of it. So how have you gone about, or how would you go about solving primarily this fear problem? Like how do you introduce people to this technology to solve that second problem of capacity building? You kind of have to get your foot in the door before you can teach people how to use it. And I've really noticed these are at least my two main blocking problems in like Canadian nonprofit education.
Well, why do they need to learn this? Like, why do they need to learn the skill that you're trying to teach?
How to use AI as part of their operations. Basically, you need at least one or two people minimum who understand a little bit how this works.
Let me maybe bridge the thing here because I'm very familiar with this issue. We here in the AI bubble, we assume that everyone uses AI tools, right? Everyone uses ChatGPT all day long. I'm sorry, guys, that's not a reality. You get out of San Francisco, even you go to Los Angeles, you ask people on the street if they even use ChatGPT at least once. No one is using it. People that used it got frustrated after 1-2 times, and they're like, this is stupid. It doesn't work for me. And that's it, right? And I'm not even talking about people overseas. One of the missions that I'm taking on right now is actually helping AI to become less English-centric and support underrepresented languages. And the reality is pretty dark when the people from Nepal come to me and they're like, we can't use any of AI tools at all. So we can't even, teach people in our countries to use it because it's pretty much useless in our languages. So that's my attempt to bridge it, why the education is important, because you can't build things if you don't even know how it works.
I think framing use case is really important, right? Whether it's like donor research or outreach, whether it's parsing through like documents. I think showing them the use case and even them giving them a prompt library or giving them a short sort of class on prompt engineering. It could even be as simple as a spreadsheet with recommended prompts that could help their role. And these kinds of steps, showing them that something they shouldn't be afraid of, showing them the use cases, giving them really actionable prompts they can use. I think that's the easiest way.
Or you start a TikTok channel.
Yes, because behavior change is like incredibly expensive, very hard to do, and capacity building is insanely hard. I'm not against it. I help run Philanthropy University, so like it's all about capacity building. But I think just to your question, it's incredibly hard.
I have more, but I'll pass it to you.
Yep.
Okay. So there's a lot of AI for good groups popping up all over the place, which is really great. Even in places like UN SDGs or World Economic Forum. I'm wondering whether this is something that really can totally be addressed on a foundational level only through those big 5 companies who are ultimately controlling it now because they have the resources to really shape it, and the government. I mean, I think it's great that, there's all this grassroots stuff going on, but to really create AI for good long-term, foundationally, I mean, is that the only solution? Really have to rely on the government and the big companies? Because I'm hearing a lot of people say that, it's going to be those big guys who's going to control it still. We're still going to have a little bit of Web 2.0, where the big boys control the industry, basically. So what's your opinion about that?
I mean, we're a liberal democracy, and we are basically formed on 3 pillars: the government, we have civil society, and then we have corporations. And regardless of how much we feel like companies run things, those 3 pillars need to be healthy. And so having these conversations in civil society is extremely important, especially in a liberal democracy. This experiment is like less than 200 years old that might not exist in the next 100 years. That's just my take.
Yeah, I'm going to briefly comment on that I think in a way there is truth in the fact that all the power and money is concentrated in those places. But I also believe in the power of individual, in every single of you here having an impact on things, right? And you never know. There's Lana here that works with the Office of President on AI stuff. You never know what kind of things will influence her to influence things there. So that's why it's a beautiful vision, and I want to believe that all of us are capable of making that impact. Dinesh?
To have a large scope scale for the reach for not-for-profit organizations, one of the things that is beneficial is to have a common platform that's automated, perhaps using AI, that can be utilized by the various cooperatives, agricultural cooperatives, medical healthcare services cooperatives, the for-profit organizations that are right now encumbering many of these service providers and value creators. And there is a role for not-for-profit platforms platforms as a way to enable that scope and scale. What do you think?
You guys want to take that one?
Yeah, I think there absolutely is. Philanthropy University still has 400,000 monthly active users, but as of, I would say, I don't know, 7 months ago, we could not find anyone to keep paying for it. So, you know, there's no lack of demand. I think, I think the question is your willingness and ability to fundraise for it. It's hard.
These platforms can be actually built for commercial and can be sort of good, enabled for the not-for-profit at a discounted rate. So I'm talking more about the platforms themselves that enable the cooperatives.
Yeah, I think one great example is Google Ad Grants, right? I think they released it about 5-6 years ago, but it allows a nonprofit 501c3 to get, I think, it's $10,000 of ad spend per month if they can prove that their mission is aligned with, it's a nonprofit mission. And maybe if it's a way to have a nonprofit platform where they can vet these impact companies or these social enterprises and then offer access to these different service providers, there's definitely an opportunity for that.
Thank you. Last question?
Okay, it's more of a comment because, like I said, I've been leading SF Tech for Good for a long time. There are nonprofits in the space where their mission is exactly that, teaching people how to use technology. One is TechSoup right here on Brannan Street. The other one is N10, which is based up in Seattle. Amy Sample Ward, who I've known for years, is the CEO of that company. So I'm just saying there are entities in the system that can help move this forward. I just think one of the things I've noticed from working in this space, kind of just building this community, is that people aren't talking to each other and people are unaware of the different organizations that are out there. But I think if you would loop in TechSoup and N10, you could get some momentum. It might not be everything, but they could help. They would probably help.
That's why you're here today.
Yeah, well, now you know.
And now you've connected all of
Now
us
we know who
to
the
that,
next
yeah.
speaker will be.
Ah,
No, but I actually really like TechSoup. They've helped us a lot in terms of giving tools that we couldn't, afford as a nonprofit and things like that. I think TechSoup is the first generation of the platforms that Dinesh is talking about. We need to see more, depth of that development. Yeah. So with that, thank you so much, Ash and Alex. This was really good. I think, I pushed you a little bit into uncomfortable territory, but I think everyone enjoys it and appreciates the tough conversations too.